Hello and welcome to episode 104 of Prose. This week, a trip to the Holy Land defines a young woman, and try again to find the truest of true norths. I find myself being a broken record, but hey, we're all getting used to this repetitious thing, right? Anyway, I do really hope this episode finds you well amid all the various social distancing and quarantines that are still ongoing at this point in April of 2020. If you're new to the show, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to our backload of over 100 episodes. Also, I do have our bedtime story series for any listeners with children. Please go follow the show on social media under @ProsePodcast across all platforms. If you're enjoying the show, please click the 5-star review button on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else that you can rate this show. It really helps out a lot. For easiest access, subscribe whatever podcast catcher you are hearing this on. And lastly, please do check out Prose's Patreon page at patreon.com/prosepodcast and consider supporting the show there. It helps me continue on with all of this. Not only will it help me continue on, I'll be extremely grateful, and I'll send you some swag in the mail. Thanks for listening. Let's get to the tale, shall we? This week, we have Birthdays in the Wind by guest author Jessica Yates and Geodetic North. Enjoy. Birthdays in the Wind by Jessica Yates. It was the longest birthday she had ever had. The sun had finally begun its slow surrender to the moon, and she had opted to go for a stroll along the hotel's crescent-shaped Mediterranean beach before the complete loss of sunlight. Dusk descending, she quickly became aware of the abrupt drop in temperature, especially as she removed her tennis shoes and walked ankle-deep into the water. She was so ready for this birthday and for this trip. Something inside her had shaken loose, and she needed time away to figure out what it was and what it meant. Of course, turning 18 was a big deal to her. It meant college was around the corner, and she was already trying to figure out what she wanted to do with her life. Well, she knew what she wanted to do, but she wasn't sure how to do it quite yet. Leaving her hometown life would happen far more quickly than even she wanted, which was saying a lot. And things with him were moving in an exciting direction. Retreating from the water's edge, she plopped down on the cool sand, immediately regretting that decision, considering she'd now be traveling with sand-ridden clothes for the next week and a half. She hugged her legs to her chest and let herself think about him. She had promised herself to refrain from doing that, from thinking about a boy when she was on the trip of a lifetime with the intent of untangling herself. But she couldn't help it out there in the quiet, enveloping darkness where only the soft pummel of waves against the shoreline could be heard. There was an element about him that made her want to live her life in a different way, and she was determined to figure out what it was. He was a musician, and since she had no musical talents of her own, even after a fruitless years-long attempt to learn to play the guitar, she was drawn to him and his natural gift. Of course, what relationship where the main draw for a girl was a guy's aptitude for music has ever actually worked out well? No, that was just a bonus for her. His kindness, the way she could feel his eyes brighten as he looked at her to laugh, how he was just living his life carefree and actively pursuing his passion, that's what got her. Not that she was really his, though. Not yet. They worked together regularly at the old movie theater in town, and they had gotten to the point where they were constantly texting, joking and flirting being the regular themes of the conversation. She felt like it was safe to say he had the same fluttering feelings about her as she had about him. The only thing holding both of them back from going any further was their 5-year age gap. her, because she expected her parents to have a problem with it, and for him, because he didn't want to be perceived as some creepy 23-year-old guy with an underage girlfriend. But now that she was officially 18, officially an adult, she was ready to toss that perceived obstacle aside, hoping he would be willing to do the same. Deciding enough time had been spent on the subject of the boy, she had started to dream about, but refused to think about too profusely. She shoved him from her mind and looked to the finally onyx blue sky to search out the moon, and maybe some familiar constellations. She saw light clouds covering most of the mass of the sky, but she could see part of the half-moon peering upon the shore from behind an illuminated cloud. There was a rather cool breeze flowing across the beach, a climate worlds apart from what she expected of Israel, even in early October. Back in Arkansas, it was still warm enough for pool parties. She could hardly bring herself to rise, to go board the Sabbath-observant elevator and return to her hotel room, when the night was so tranquil and therapeutic. She wanted to engrave the feeling of peaceful freedom she felt into her memories so that she could always return to that night and that seashore as a place of true pacification. Even though she was only in the middle of trying to find out what was lighting up inside herself, threatening to burn right through her, she couldn't help but think the soft evening had assuaged her restlessness, at least for the time being. "There's the sun I've been expecting," she mused as the high noon sun lashed her back in Caesarea. Out in the open, unshaded ruins of what was once one palace of King Herod's, the expected Middle Eastern atmosphere was in high gear, even with the mild Mediterranean Sea directly flanking the swath of remaining history. Sweating under her cotton t-shirt and jeans, she shaded her eyes and read the inscription on the plaque in front of her. A crumbled, barely there rectangle of ruins extended into a shallow area of the sea just off the shore, and the plaque claimed it used to be one of Herod's swimming pools. Structures like this abounded, all mostly ruined and few resembling what they once claimed to be. A toilet here, a servant's home there, a dilapidated amphitheater casting shade on the bulk of the ruins. She wandered to the outside of the natural pool to get a better look at the sea, clear of ancient debris. The shifting turquoise shades of the water revealed a clear view to the bottom of the sea, even matching the brilliance of Kauai's crystalline beaches she had visited years before. It was so hot, and the water looked so refreshing that she wished she had brought her swimsuit for this part of the tour. Submerging herself in the ancient waters, as permanently fixed now as they were in Herod's time, seemed like a much more appropriate way to appreciate the history of Caesarea. Unfortunately, though, all she could do was watch the sea shimmer from a distance as she continued along the well-beaten path to observe more antique relics. The tall stone walls enclosing the dusty oval arena were in disrepair like the rest of Caesarea, but to her they seemed to retain more of a semblance of what they were built for than most of the other architectural components dotting the flat landscape. Rising far over the tourists' heads and transforming into rows of stone bleachers, the walls looked as if they were meant to contain dinosaurs rather than their actual purpose. As she stood in the middle of the empty stadium, she imagined what the chariot races held here were like and marveled at the thought of how loud the events must have been. People screaming for their favorites, the hooves of the horses pounding around, chariots slamming into walls and each other. All would have combined into a ruckus that could have been heard throughout all of Caesarea. She was all about horses. Always had been. As a child, she was obsessed over them through books and drawings, and she remembered every single instance when she had been able to interact with a real one. The typical horse-crazy girl, she grew up with that same energy and began to beg her parents for a horse of her own, a wish that was fulfilled at age 16 when her father finally gave in and tracked down the perfect first horse. Star. a grumpy bay Tennessee walking horse with a perfect white diamond under his bushy black forelock. Star proved to be as close to an animal soulmate as Helen could find and fueled the blaze attracting her to a career with horses. She really wanted to find some job in the horse racing industry. And the fact that she was standing in an ancient hippodrome halfway across the world from her real life was just one more sign that it was something she just had to pursue. Ruins here, ruins there, ruins everywhere. Having had her fill of the history, she meandered through the rest of the remains of the ancient seaside resort and found herself back at the entrance of the modernly established national park. A superficial oasis in the sand-blown environment of deterioration, implanted green grass and short tropical trees dotted the landscape, along with a vendor trying to sell cold bottles of water to the tourists who didn't anticipate the heat. From the bench she had made her way to, she could see the backside of some of the has-been structures and a handful of her co-travelers huddled around Rahi, their native tour guide, bus driver, and all-around caretaker and entertainer who was, no doubt, giving them a special account of the history of the building. Rahi was a fairly small man, round through the middle with an increasing baldness that spoke of his nearness to 60. What he lacked in stature, however, he made up for in charisma. His personality was such that it seemed as if he was legitimately born to be a tour guide, created to haul strangers around the Holy Land for a week or two and regale them with stories of ancient history, some true and some a bit embellished. He was gregarious and sincerely cared about his charges, consistently running around the lot of them and making sure they were all adequately amused and doing well, like a mother hen with her chicks. If you needed water or a story or a snack, Rahi was there for you. Though the sun had been beaming down on them all day, gray clouds, some the color of an ashy charcoal, had started to roll in, and more than a slight breeze had picked up. She leaned back in her bench and took in the wind, not realizing how much she missed the familiar gusts from the farm at home until that moment. The wind here, though, in a climate where dry heat was the ruler of all things, scoured her and made her long for something. Thank you for listening to Birthdays in the Wind, an original short story by Jessica Yates. Jessica Yates is originally from Arkansas. She dreams of horses, pumps good music, enjoys getting tattoos, and writes in her all-too-rare free time. This week, she lives in Seattle. Next week, she'll decide that when next week gets here. Please do stick around for our second journey together this week. It's sure to be some fun. Geodetic North, an original short story by Jared I. McGee. Freezing to death? Ain't that bad as it turns out. Flashes of childhood. My little brother almost drowned at my 8th birthday party, but the distracted elderly church lady meant to be watching him pulled him from an early death in the last moments. Songs from family trips to Gulfport. The Lord said to Noah, there's gonna be a floody. Those songs were non-stop for 16 round-trip hours. Lines of poetry whispered by the gnawing winds. Some work of noble work may yet be done? Maybe not, blustery one. maybe not. Wave after wave of comforting hallucination born of a web of memories and unrealized dreams. From hypothetical alternate degree paths to weddings wished for but never come to be. As the cold takes hold, I feel nothing but happiness. Certainly, trepidation hangs tightly in the initial hours of hypothermia and an ever-dropping body temperature. But that quickly becomes a distant memory, silenced by the echoes of was, what ifs, and what could be's. Before my hands become too cold to function, I write some letters to my family and some final thoughts in my journal, the latter being some last vain attempt at achieving immortality. I know I am close to my end. The letters are heartfelt and raw, but I stop my journal entry before I become too preachy and grandiose. My greatest fear in dying out here in the mountainous wilderness is that I will be compared to that self-righteous asshole from that Into the Wild book. The last thing I need is to live on as some derivation of that guy. Derivative. It's enough to make me wake back up from the call of the cold just a bit. That possibility warms my blood. Unlike that guy, I've done my math. My equipment was sound and triply checked. My rations were beyond sufficient, even with extra days figured in. My ego was in check. All that and more sets me apart from the faux hero that I so loathed when reading his story as part of honors college at UCA. I'm not an expert, don't get me wrong, but I certainly prepared in far more diligent fashion than he did. Yet, here I am. My breath catching and crystallizing in my beard, my hours more than numbered here on this earth. For all my decrying the Into the Wild guy, I am meeting an all but identical fate with just a handful of different details in place. One comfort, if you can call it that, is that I actually know what I did wrong. 2 words, and 2 words alone. Geodetic North. Like most people, I had no idea what the term meant when I went out into the wilds of Alaska. Now, though, I certainly can recall what little I learned about it in my year of Cub Scouts and my entire life of being an outdoorsy Southern boy. As it turns out, Geodetic North and Magnetic North are not one and the same. Magnetic North is what I have always been taught to go off of, always trusting my compass to lead me truly through the unknown terrain, land and sea. Geodetic North, sometimes called True North, is different by what smarter people than me call arc seconds. Some small measurement involving angles. On top of all that, I learned but clearly forgot or compartmentalized years ago the concept of grid north. Geodetic, magnetic, celestial, astronomical grid, so much to remember for one little axis and where to go when out exploring our world. The real kick in the pants? Even with all these varying measurements and directional concepts, one can still be off because gravity can be just a bit different in variant localities. Yikes, right? So what does this have to do with me passing away in cold and alone? 1 degree here, 1 degree there, out in the wild places of Earth. Such an error can lead an intrepid explorer into dire circumstances. They can miss a bridge, a pass, a trailhead that points in the direction of civilization and opportunities for medical or supply help. For all my planning, I let this detail slip. I mixed up geodetic and magnetic and grid north, mixing and mashing my calculations and plans into a morass of conflicting information that I'd written off as being accurate to the nth degree. Honestly, I shouldn't be surprised. I gave up mathematics long ago, finding all the interesting classes in the humanities to overshadow and outshine the courses in math and science that I'd actually enjoyed up to that point. Even when I was a calculus fiend, I loathed geometry, something that was not lost on me as I did my planning and measuring for this trip. Here I was, a subpar writer and editor, thinking he could take on the world. I should have known that my math skills would have diminished in the 15 years since I graduated high school. These thoughts really did bring that ounce of comfort, though it really is but an ounce. My thoughts, like my body, begin to slow. Words come to me, echoing in my mind, reminding me of how silly I have been to make this simple mistake. Latitude, longitude, stars, poles, axes, bus 142, celestial, 5-pointed, zenith, terminating, thurbin, true, grid, edges, rectangle, square, parallel, perpendicular, magnetic, meridian, McCandless, geodetic. Geodetic. True north. I could never find it in my life. I never found my purpose. I won't get to marry, have kids. My purpose, no purpose. I wonder if anyone ever finds their true north. Wait, no. I know the answer to that. I've met several people over the years that have, be it through relationships, family, accomplishment, self-betterment. Maybe this is my true north. Here. Now. This last day or so of unadulterated thought and introspection, knowing I'll not make it back to the life I'd hit this trail to escape in the first place. My mother will miss me. My brother will miss me. Others will say, "How sad." And then we'll move quickly on. Post some non-committal words on Facebook and go back to it. Remember that I was once someone they said they loved before they needed change and disguised base animal instincts and very real human fears with logistics and more respectable things. So much clarity. Maybe this is my true north. I realize I am not cold anymore. Thank you for listening to Geodetic North. All sounds have been taken from freesound.org. And the track behind this story comes from user Puffermuffin. The track is being used under a CC0 1.0 public domain dedication license. That does it this week for Pros. Our next full episode will be in 2 weeks' time. And please do consider sharing this podcast with someone you think might enjoy these bi-weekly journeys. Amid all the madness, I hope that you will remember to love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life as it is, always, stranger than fiction.